Good afternoon, everyone. So today, for this session, as you can see, we have some quite savvy people on stage. The session is called Learning from Art. Yeah, learning from art, music, fashion. We're learning from something that is not in the built environment. Because there are a lot of times architects think they know everything. We need to realize that other people have done it better, especially with the vernacular, the African vernacular. And for a long time, architecture has always been influenced by art and music, and it's sort of started to phase away. Wanted to bring back that conversation and see how we can do it in the perspective of the African vernacular.
Definitely, that's correct. Here, obviously, do I need to introduce these people? Yeah, most of them are known, but obviously from the far end we have Blinky, followed by Dan. Yeah, I'll give you time to introduce yourselves. Followed by Iona, and this gentleman over here, Mucyo. Yes, could you guys kindly introduce yourselves and possibly what you do? Yeah. Go for it. Yeah.
Hi everybody, my name is Mucyo. I'm a photographer, artist, and now author. Yeah, I also used to work here, so Boogertman+Partners, thank you for having me back. I really appreciate it.
Hi everybody, my name is Iona.
Is the mic working?
Here we go. My name is Iona. I am the creative director of Kiko Romeo. We are a Kenyan fashion brand. Started in 1996 by my mum, and then I've been working with her over the past years and have come to take over. So yeah.
Hi, my name is Dan Aceda. I struggle to say what I do because I've had the opportunity to work in many different spaces. But the word I'm using for myself is I'm an Imagineer. I like to imagine things.
Hello. I'm Bill Salanga, also known as Blinky, and I'm many things to many people. So I'm a producer, I'm a DJ, I'm a songwriter, I'm a rapper, I'm a photographer as well. And also, I really love architecture. So it's pretty cool to be here. Thank you. We'll talk more.
Yeah, so there's a word Emma said earlier. They are multi-potentialists. They do a lot of things. Yeah. So when I say art, I don't just mean the art that we know pinned up on the walls. It's photography, it's fashion, it's writing. And we asked each of them to bring for us, remember we're learning from art today, to bring for us a piece or the current project that they are ongoing, and to talk about their African influences in those particular projects. And it's a vast, and there's a vast diversity on how vernacular can be interpreted. And us as architects, engineers within the room, it's good to understand where these influences come from and how it's interpreted differently. How then can we do it in our own fields? Yeah. So I want to, without further ado, get into the session. And we are going to start on my far right, Mucyo, and we're going to present. If someone please help me with the TV, with the remote on the TV, to present what Mucyo is going to talk about. He has a book that he wanted me to pass around, and you can have a look as he will talk more about it.
Just as they're figuring that bit out, it's quite interesting how all of you, basically as creatives, yeah. So possibly out there you're known as having one sort of creative idea, like what you do. Yeah, you're a photographer, you're a musician. Whereas Blink, you've just mentioned you do photography on the side. Yeah, you've mentioned. So that's the interesting thing of bringing creatives together. You know, especially in this discussion of art. What is art? Is it just physical art? Is it sculpting? Is it music? And so basically the whole topic we're going to be discussing also has a lot to do with creativity generally. yeah, and how that informs even architecture or how we live as Africans. Yeah. Go for it.
Steve and Irvin, thank you for having me. Boogertman+Partners, thank you. Like I said, my name is Mucyo Gasana. I'm a photographer. I have just recently come out with my new book, self-published. It's called Master Weavers. Hopefully you can take a look at it as it's going around, and here it is on the screen. This is what I call a documentary impact project. The purpose was to kind of spread the word and kind of like introduce people, especially Rwandans, I'm Rwandese by the way, to a culture and a heritage that a lot of people knew about but didn't know about the people who were like helping to keep it alive and like keep it going. So this is a coffee table book, mostly comprised of photos, poetry, and some first-hand accounts, telling the stories of these master weavers of Rwanda. There's 35 weavers featured in this project, and I say project because this book is not just a book, but there's actually a project behind it that, with the help of MasterCard Foundation, we support these women financially and also take them through workshops to teach them modern business skills to allow them to continue what they're doing and support themselves through being able to reach clientele directly. So all the photographs you see in here are taken by me on 120 medium format film, developed by me and scanned by me. It was very important that these were taken in not just black and white, but on film, because I wanted to kind of keep in line with the age-old craft of storytelling and art, essentially. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. It's been in the works from conception. It's been 3 years. It came to me while I was sitting in an airport in Rome, and I just realized that the Agaceta basket. For those of you, I'm sure you maybe know, if you know anything to do with like Rwandese culture, you've seen the Agaceta basket. It's like shaped like, yeah, I'm sure you've seen it. And it's on the Rwandese emblem, so it's on our passports, on everything, right? And I was sitting down and kind of like I was staring at my passport and kind of didn't realize, like, I knew about this Agaceta basket, but I didn't realize the level of importance. So then that kind of put me into a place where I started like researching it, finding out about the women who still make them, where they live, etc. And that got me to partner up with Gaia Links, which is an institution in Rwanda that has been cultivating these women for years. And with them, I was able to like contact some of the women, go visit them, make the photographs, interview them, and put this beautiful project together. Yeah, I hope you like it.
So, as I said, my name is Iona. I'm the creative director of Kiko Romeo. We are a contemporary fashion brand based in Kenya. And so what I've got up here is a few slides from our latest collection, which is called Akili ni Mali. And it explores Swahili culture. So for me, art and, as a consequence, fashion is a way for me to learn more about my identity and where I'm from and the environment around me. So through this, one thing that I want to pick up is on the textiles. So the ones that have just been featured here are inspired by the kanga, so they're kind of designed on the same principles as the kanga, looking at the symbols, but as well as the proverbs that are typical that you see in kangas. The flowers are inspired by the passion flower, which is something that I tend to see quite a lot when I'm at the coast. And then for the proverbs that we use a mixture of Swahili Sanifu and Sheng, just as a kind of illustration of how we interact with each other in the environment. For me, the textiles and the clothes that we wear are really sort of a way to communicate with each other without having to verbalize anything. So the colors that we choose to wear, the way in which we choose to wear our garments are really an expression of our identity and a lot more within that. And I think that is in art in general and whatever, whether it's through music or through photography or whatever, it's really a way for you to express yourself, but also to kind of delve deeper into the world around you and what it's made up of. So this exploration began into looking at the Swahili. I think a lot of the time they're sort of othered into just being the people of the coast who know their food and their textiles, but the significance that they hold it within the African continent and like global trade dynamics for such a huge amount of time is kind of pushed to the side. So it was really interesting for me to uncover that, learn more about that. And then speaking more generally on the textiles that we use in the brand, a lot of the time you see that like the clothes that we tend to wear are imported, and a lot of the stuff that we have to then use, the raw materials that we have to use, are imported or dumped here. But then we have a lot of opportunity to kind of explore our textile heritage and what it means to make textiles that are informed by our context. So whether that is now having a blank canvas that we can then work on top of and add to, or if it's weaving our own textiles from here. So looking at what the sort of raw materials that we have, so a lot of cottons, but then also now exploring, which is the pictures that you saw at the beginning of the slide, the brightly colored ones. Those ones are on a base of orange peel and lotus. So there's a lot of opportunity to innovate within the waste, what we deem as waste products. So yeah, I think that kind of sums up my exploration in this collection, but just also generally in how I channel my art into the wearable environment, I guess.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, so I guess for me, I'd like to say I'm a recovering architect, because I actually trained as an architect with just down the road with that great man there, who we were in class with. And so when I was invited to this, one of the things I thought I should do is I should show you guys some of the work that I do that has no constraints. So I don't have a site. Oh, okay, in this case I have a site, which I'm connected to, but I don't have a budgetary constraint. So I'm designing without budget and designing about what I think is the future. What has driven my work, I know now, I found the vocabulary. What has driven my work ever since college and right after with my music, I've always been interested in what the future African person wanted or needed. I got very impatient with the industry and how we were thinking about the African as always looking backwards. So when you talk about African, it was like, oh, let's go look at Amanyata. Let's go see the homesteads. That was where we were beginning. And what always used to annoy me about it was, what about the person who, how about the imagination of an African? What can you imagine and what can you see beyond what we already know exists? I'm not saying that this is in sort of contrarian to the other idea of let's look back and see our identity. But I was thinking more about the identity of an African as something that is evolving as the African person themselves are evolving. And the ability to imagine a future for themselves is something that should be included in the conversation. And so with my work, I've looked at ways for us to move forward. I guess I can mention one more thing, is that earlier in my life, I did an album called Benganology, which was based on a style of music that is from Western Kenya called Benga. And that time the conversation was, oh, you know, we need to have an identity and we have to have one sound. I know Blinky knows about this a lot because you fought a lot. but yeah, there's this idea that if you're a Benga musician, you need to sing in your vernacular language, right? You need to play the instrument exactly the way it was played in 1762 when the guy first made it, or whenever. And you're not allowed to change it. If you change it, it's wrong. You're supposed to sound like Yusundur from here. That was the challenge. So you play that instrument. But what I felt is I came through an eclectic childhood. Born in the village. My beginning of my life was in the village, and then I moved to the city, and so I have city life as well. I said, but my music has these two influences, and so as I make my music, I want to change it. And I was very adamant that we are going to have to make benga for the 21st century and for the future centuries. And so as an item of culture, benga must change, it must learn. Now we know jazz, now we know R&B, now we know all these other rap, we know hip hop. So why aren't those genres coming into benga, and then we can change it? Because as an African who was born the time I am aware of those things, and so I can make those things. And so I began to play this type of music with all these new influences. We started influencing more deliberately stuff like Zouk. And then we began to build a live music scene that was, I think at the time, I was like one of 2 or 3 musicians that were playing live every single week, and missing studio, and Tony had to cover for me. But it had to happen, that was the path. But what we ended up creating was we sparked a change in how we saw the music. We sparked a culture of experience and then one reporter wrote, so I went to get an interview, and I'm busy, I have to get interviews, and I was begging for an interview. And this guy I was begging for an interview said, so what is this benga music you're doing? I said, well, this music. He said, I know, I'm the authority on benga music. I said, okay. I apologize about that. Then he said, you see, every benga musician I know is twice your age. And I said, okay, so what? Then he said, well, so there's Dola Kabari, there's, what's his name, Joseph Camaro, there's all, and he went through the whole list. I said, all those are the kings of benga. So he said, what does that make you? Do you consider yourself a crown prince? I said, actually, I'm going to put that in my email. That's so. So I became. So the headline of the article was in quotes. He said, "The crown then quote unquote the crown prince of benga." It's supposed to make me look foolish, but I put it in my email signature and I flew with it. It was in my next album, and I said, you know what? Yes, I am. I'm actually the one thinking about this stuff, and I'm thinking of what we can do for the future. And I also advocated a lot with Ketable Music, who are writing a book on benga at the time. And they wrote it for over 5 or 6 years. And I remember having a very heated argument with Tabu Osusa where I said, benga must change. You cannot write a book on benga, but you can write a book on the shades of benga. And the book came out called Shades of Benga. And so I'm owning that because I changed it. But in a nutshell, that's kind of been my journey. I'm interested in imagining what the African is now forward, having learned from everything that has come before us.
Check. So, good afternoon. One of the things when I was starting out, I remember I was part of a group called Just a Band Still Am, and we made this video called Iona Pain, which was animated, like in the idea of, at that time we were listening to a lot of French house, and the song, I took it to TV, and one of the first things they told me was that this will never play, maybe like in 5 years. I'm a bit of a rebel, so I was just like, oh, okay. If you guys won't play us, then I'm sure that there's someone out there who's gonna listen. And I took it, I was talking to a bunch of friends, and one of my friends was like, yo, I know someone at Channel O. Let's take it there. And when we took it to Channel O, they ran with it. And over the years, I've just been like exploring a lot of different sounds, because for me, as Dan was saying, I'm very proud of the sounds that we made, and I'm very influenced by the sounds of Kenyan artists from the past, a lot of African artists from the past, but I'm never trying to be them. Like, my thing is, I'm living here now. I want to see the ideas that come to me and I'm passionate about exist in real life. And so that's super important to me, and it's been a very interesting journey. So I wanted to share with you just a bunch of ideas that I've worked on in the past that really bring in the idea of our heritage and our sounds and our tribal chants and how I sneaked them into my productions. So this sound is a Giriama sound that I found a couple of years ago. So I got that sound. It was on an LP, a really old Kenyan music LP, and this is how I chopped it. I really liked that sound, and so on the beat that I made, it's called No Touch 'Em, and it featured a Nigerian artist called Neka, and this is how I added it to the beat. Might be a bit loud. So I was just having fun with it, and that's how that came out. And it's an old Kenyan song by Slim Ali and the Hodi Boys. So I originally made this for Mudhoni, the drama queen, but Octofizo came to my studio and I was like, yo, play me some beats. And then I played him what I'd worked on, and then he ran with it, and I was traveling. And when I came back, he'd already made this song, recorded it.
What's up, sweetheart? What's popping? Ndakujoka uko fini kupeleke shopping. Nikudungisha dia mademo anze kukopi. Nasikia ni msupa di Jesus anakuwaga mekunoki. Halap, that's my Holy Spirit talking. Turn up, kuja ni love me ni doki. Kukupenda sichoki, kwa row ni toki.
So you kind of get the drift. Is like, what is it about our sound? For me, it's always like, if I'm sampling something, I want to figure out how to make it so that it makes sense for the time we're in. And I think it was a rapper who said this. I don't know who it was, that music is liquid architecture or something of that sort. And architecture is solid music. It's like there's a lot of building blocks that a lot of people who look at a building might not be able to really see what went into it. It's the same with music. Like there's someone who can hear that song, it's like that's either a good song or a bad song to you. But for me, as someone who really listens to this and is always trying to figure out what's our Kenyan sound according to how I see it. And it doesn't have to be like what Dan is doing, which is cool, and I love it, and I've really been inspired by him, or a lot of other Kenyan artists, but I want to see in the global conversation what's our contribution to sound. I'll finish there for now.
Awesome stuff, man. That was quite interesting. Yeah. Thanks for that, Blinky, and all of you. Thank you for that insight. I want to ask you, Blinky, firstly. Yeah. There's something interesting about you did mention that. You know, as we talk about this whole African vernacular, there's a whole aspect of a lot of people abroad, perhaps abroad, view Africa as having a specific look, a specific sound, a specific style, whereas you described how, yes, it is important to look at that vernacular aspect. Obviously, we're in a globalized world now. Things have changed. You can't be playing the same Bengal as in Bengal. Music now, and expect everyone to vibe with it, unless you enjoy it. But, yeah, so I found that quite interesting. Do you guys feel that it's quite important to do the same in all of your different disciplines? And how have you perhaps used that to define your craft in modern days?
You asked with me. Well, as far as I think, what I've always preached is like regarding photography is shoot what you know, shoot what you love, and I think the same can apply for anything else. Produce what you know, sing what you know, create what you know, work with the things that you know and love, and then feel like as long as you're doing that, like it'll come from a perspective that's unique to you, and you can't go wrong. Like, period.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I also think that in terms of what we're perceived to be outside and even within ourselves, we're constantly evolving, constantly changing, and that's part of the process. And so we'll constantly pick from the past, but then it will always be informed by our current situations. And I think that we have to trust that process as well in what we produce, but in also how we consume it. We'll pick different elements from the past and take them forward, and each of our unique experiences are going to define that. And when it comes to fashion and going out with fashion from Africa, it's always there's a stereotype as to what that's supposed to look like. So having to break that down and really stand for what we are and what we're doing has been very difficult. But I think it's more the approach to things that is what can then define us. Whether it's like use of color or the way in which we listen to different sounds and interpret them, but how that happens as opposed to having to be set within specific bounds of this is what we should be.
Okay, so in the world that we're in, I'm finding that we're having it's so interesting to be an African right now, because there's so much, like particularly with African music, there's so much presence now in the global stage than there has ever been. And I remember the first show we played with just a band in the States was in 2012, and the only sounds I could hear was like Manu Dibango and those kinds of guys. But right now, like you'll hear so much Wizkid, so much Burna Boy, so much of those kinds of guys. And there's a lot of, but particularly with people like, I feel like Nigerians are very good at owning their culture and pushing it. And so that's one of the things that now we have to really understand is like they've had a culture of making music and exporting it for a long time. We've had a culture of making music, but I think with Kenyans is always like we're very good at absorbing other people's ideas and identity for whatever reason, and maybe Dan, you could articulate it better. And so now the challenge for us is how to make it such that yes, we're pushing our sound, but also competing globally. I don't know if I went on my own tangent or I answered your question.
Yeah, so Blinky and I have these conversations a lot, especially in the context of music. But I think picking up from what Iona was talking about evolution, And then just also what Blinky has said, in the space, when you first go touring, if you leave the country, you arrive in the States in 2012, it's Manu Dibango. Manu Dibango's music started like in the late 70s. He's sampled by Michael Jackson. When Michael Jackson was still Michael Jackson. He had already sampled Manu Dibango, so this music has been around for a long time. And I think that the challenge that we have as African creators, in my view, is a branding challenge. Because the West was doing the majority of the documentation. So when the West, after, they kind of froze in time after colonialism, yeah? That's when the big photographers were last here taking documentation pictures. So when you Google Africa, you get hills that don't have people, right? It's always, nobody lives here. It's a fantastic landscape with nobody, yeah? And this was the picture that, you know, whoever took in 19 whenever, or 18 whatever, or those are the stories they wrote. And so they're frozen in time. Because then the next wave of content creation in Africa is driven by problems. So violence, the guy wins, goes and wins a prize for taking a photo of suffering and violence. Right? And so journalism, documentation about Africa has always been driven by that. First it was, oh, these people who, I was taking a photo of a tree, then I found a guy. Oh gosh. You know, that's kind of how it's been. And so we have this very delicate branding challenge where we have to teach the world of Africa almost afresh. And my friend Natasha Kimani likes to talk about changing the narrative. And we have to tell the story of Africa, again, like what you've just done with Rwanda. You're the only person who could have ever done it. And with that basket. I've seen that basket all the time. I never connected it to how you've connected with it. But people take pictures of Rwanda about the hills and the gorillas, you know? It's like that's the most interesting thing, that the world knows about it. And it's going to be up to us to craft this new reality. And again, I'm just going back to say, we have to brand. And in many ways, we have to, we almost have to run adverts for Africa as it is today, because they're not seeing it. If the name dropping guy, they ask you whether you have they ask you whether you live in an actual house, I'm sure, because they don't know.
Thank you. I have a question, but I want to open up questions to the floor if anyone wants to ask something on our panelists. Any questions?
I'll ask all of you again. You would have picked anything to inspire you. Why Africa? Why the narrative? Especially in fashion. Like how do you create it so that it's distinctively African? How is photography? Photography maybe take photos of Africa. Africa can say it's African. But what makes it definitely African so that we don't confuse it with something influenced by a foreign idea or and maybe the second one is maybe a comment is I know you're running up, you mentioned something about stereotype, what the African stereotype is. Unfortunately for I think in architecture, we wish we have that stereotype to work against it. Maybe that's why this conversation is important. We don't even have what we call stereotypical African architecture. So how did you guys get to a point where you already have a stereotype and you can fight? One, you can fight. Thank you, Phil. I like your first question a lot because it actually it resonates a lot with me because firstly, I don't believe that it even like matters that, like I was talking earlier about perspective, right? And in this sense, I think what's more important is the why. So like I can say that like I'm African, so I'm gonna make African art. I'm Rwandese, so I'm gonna, take photographs in Rwanda or whatever. But I think what matters more is why. So like because I'm Rwandese, there's a reason, like why do I connect more with this culture, with this whatever? It's because I've grown up also hearing these stories. So I think what matters more, even if you're not African or Rwandese, it's the reason why. Me and my friends talk a lot about the the further process? Why do you do something, and why do you insist on like the art behind the actual process of what you're doing as opposed to the final result? Like, for example, like people ask me all the time, like, why do you shoot film? It's such a like, you know, laborious process, et cetera, et cetera. But like, actually, it's more of the journey, like creating that process, like actually, you know, imprinting light on photographic paper and developing it in like chemistry and scanning it or making handmade prints. Like that already adds such a level of like care and like detail to like whatever piece of art you're making, whether it's, you know, like I said, for whatever reason. So I think it comes down to, I don't want to like keep repeating what I'm saying, but it's like, you know, do what you know and do what you love, because if you do that, there'll never be no one can ever tell you that it's a perspective that isn't valid. Do you know what I'm saying? Your second question, though, I kind of flew over my head. Could you just repeat it? Stereotypes. You mean, and when you say stereotypes, you mean like? I hear you. In my opinion, that's not something that even like crosses my mind at all. For me, it's, I think I can create art about something that I know better than any foreigner or Westerner or whatever has done before. For example, like this project, right? You mentioned, I've, you know, told this story from a perspective, but actually this book has nothing, almost nothing to do with the actual Agaseke basket. This book is totally about the 35 weavers that are featured in it, and about their lives and what they've been through. And after being genocide survivors, they've still dedicated their lives to, you know, keeping this culture. So for me, it matters nil whether there's a stereotype or whether there isn't, you know. So
I have a question though, because maybe I don't understand the stereotype, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, like if you go to Greece, there's a certain way that they build houses. Europe, the buildings that they've had from the 16th century look a certain way. If you go to Lamu or the coast, there's a certain feel that their architecture has. So I'm not understanding how you're saying there's no.
So I think if I understood his question correctly, he's asking in the context of Africa. Greece has a Greek building. Is there a Kenyan building? There's no stereotype of this is a Kenyan building.
But that's the same question with Kenyan music. It's like, or I remember when people were looking at Kenyan, trying to make a Kenyan dress, and there's a competition for a Kenyan dress. But it's like, Ugandans don't have that issue. Nigerians don't have it. It's like they'll wear the outfit and you automatically know what it is. So I don't know what it is in the formation of this country that led us to that point where we have to question so much, and yet there is. Yeah, but that's a good pause for thought. I didn't. Mbona unaskip hii question, bwana architect?
I'm going to go first to the initial question about kind of relating it back to what is an African product. And in a certain sense, it's the fact that we are Africans creating it. And I think that's the only thing that really should have to define it. I don't think there needs to be more. We don't have to kind of stand for it more than that. It's just the fact that we are here and we are informed by our contacts. When it comes to fashion, specifically, or actually no, everything in general, we're constantly in a state of hybridization as we evolve, and so the influences will be there. So it's what is the strongest voice, but then accepting that other influences are going to come in whether we like it or not, and that's part of the process. And then, so for me, when it comes to the textiles that I create or the clothes that I create, they will be informed by the kind of the position that I'm sitting in, with all the different influences coming in from the past, from my heritage, but also from the outside world and what I'm looking at. So taking it very specifically with the collection, you'll look at the kind of colors that are of the season or that are going to come, translating them slightly to your environment, looking at the kind of cuts and what's in fashion in that sense, but then taking that as a framework and then looking at what my inspiration is within that and how can I evolve and innovate within that. When it comes to Kenyan national dress, the question that I honestly don't know, and I don't know why we sort of I don't know if it's, if I look at, for example, Nigeria, their pride is very loud and it's very out there, whereas ours is very, very subtle and very quiet. So I don't know if that's something that kind of plays into that. But if I was to start as to what is the Kenyan national dress and how would I even go about it, I honestly don't know. Because I think it's also the fact that we are so diverse as a nation and we have so many different influences that to pin it down to one thing is quite tricky.
Well, I think I just want to add one thing to what you've said, which I think is really powerful. I think the fact that it's made by an African is enough. And Professor Ali Mazrui has a theory on this. He says, how do you become African? He says there are 3 ways to become African. One is you can be an African of the blood, so you're born of African descent, Barack Obama. Or you can be an African of the soil, so you live here long enough and you become an African. And the example that I learned today is Johan, for instance. Johan told me he's an African, considered himself African. He's been here this long, so yes, he's an African. And then the other way to become an African is you become an African of both the blood and the soil. So you're born of African descent and you also live here. And that gives you that Africa has always been open to, throughout history, has always been open to trade, to connection, to meeting other cultures. There's African culture across every ocean, every direction has, and through history. And so that's always been there. So just having the African created is important. And I think the second thing to say with the stereotype and what we're trying to come out from under, the African experience was interrupted quite rudely and quite violently. And in some situations, there's also a lot of destruction of actual real history. Cecil Rhodes burnt archaeological material so that he could destroy the culture of the Zimbabweans. Archaeologists have written for long about how this was a policy. They were destroying evidence of things having existed before. So there's been an interruption in our development of the peoples of Africa. When you add on top of colonialism, then you have the problem that we're discussing, right? You have a Mijikenda style, but then you put the Mijikenda, you say, oh no, that's just Mijikenda, let's ignore them, and let's put them in context with guys from my sites, the Wanyalas, all the other side, put them all together and say, you guys come together with a thing. But these 2 guys don't have the same weather, they don't have the same language, don't have anything in common that you're bringing, and when you force it, you struggle to then create that common thing. While if you allowed it to naturally develop as developed in Europe, then you can have Czechoslovakia used to be together, the Knights Czech and the Slovaks, and then they're slowly finding each their own separate identity because it's been allowed to happen. While for us in our context, we're kind of mashing it together and saying, whatever rises to the top is the one we'll take. So in Nigerian, my theory of the Nigerian experience is the bigger tribes are forming what you think is Nigeria. But when you travel there, then you find, oh, actually, no, this guy doesn't look at all like what I thought Nigerians would look. But it's what I saw from the outside as the biggest expression.
Oh, interesting.
Sorry, thank you. So not really a question, but just something to add on. I think it's also a question of, somebody mentioned branding. And I think the stories that we tell are the ones that get heard. So when we think about when you go out into the West and you talk Kenya, people think Maasai. because that's a story that has been told. When you're thinking about the Ugandans and the Ugandan dress, again, it's because we have seen the Busutis. But there are other dresses out there. It's not just that one. So I think when we talk about that, the element of what is known, it's really a question of what story is being told, because the story that is told is the story that is heard. But there's so many other stories, and I like the example of the Mijikenda and the Luya, because then those two stories are two complete different stories. So depending on the one that's told, that's the one that's going to be heard. And I think for Kenya, just starting from home, our stories are so diverse. I don't think we can have one story. I don't think it will be possible. And as Africans, even more, because then we're talking Tunisia, we're talking Kenya, we're talking Benin, we're talking Malawi, we're talking Namibia. I don't think we can have one story. I don't think it's possible.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting. There was another question.
Yeah. Hello. Mine is more of maybe a comment. First of all, then I would pose a question. So my name is Peter Achayo from African Art Matters on Instagram, for those who may. So I curate news about contemporary African art, and this basically refers to painters mostly and sculptures. And I look at, say, like your panel here today, usually in this country, I mean, the artists, the contemporary artists are usually considered like the stepchildren, where where we're referencing Kenyan art. So, and particularly in a space where we're addressing architecture, I believe the two are pretty close. First of all, in terms of their expression, which is visual, if we're going to borrow elements, say, which we incorporate into a design aesthetic that, say, perhaps could be Kenyan or could be African, are there lessons that we can also refer back in terms of the artists that are doing their trade, whether here or internationally? And I'll say my last statement by referencing three very, very important artists out of so many that practice here. One of them is Michael Armitage, whom perhaps some of you may be familiar with him. I mean, he is working based on a Findery cloth from Uganda, which he uses as his canvas, that has become globally famous, Early this year, he was commissioned by the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK to redesign, actually, the British pound. So you can already see, I mean, how his trade or his vocabulary and language is being transferred to a different other media. Then we've got our Wangeshi Mutu, ex-Loreto, working out of New York, now partially based in Nairobi as well. Globally famous. I mean, she considers some of her closest friends to be the Obamas, Jay-Z, and Beyonce. Not for real, I mean, but we don't pay attention to these people. She's doing some of the most amazing sculptures right now in the world. Never honored in this country. Perhaps, is there a space? Could it be Tattoo City? Could it be one of the buildings by Boogertman that might be one of these days could commission one of her pieces? And lastly, I'm going to talk about the first black chancellor of a university in the UK, knighted by the Queen, Magdalene Odundo, also Kenyan. I think from that, not too far from your place, who is working out of Agulu, Agulu, Nyungu, pottery. But she's become globally famous. Her collection, I believe the most collected African artist perhaps in the world, 51 museums, without mentioning families and individuals. 51 museums in the world, including her works are part of the royal collection as well, the Queen's collection. None of these three have ever been honored here. I have not heard anybody seeking them for collaboration or their voices being sought, and there are hundreds and thousands others as well. So for all of us sitting here, painters and artists from Nairobi have become some of the most famous people in the world. And we'd better start paying attention to some of them before the world, as I've had this panel excellently demonstrate, that ours are more honored out there and people begin to sample their works, then maybe perhaps we begin to chase after them. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm gonna just add one thing to what you're saying. It's like Wangeshi Mutu in the Just a Band story is such an important figure because Han Binyavanga helped us set up our first show in the States, because they saw, I don't know what it is that they saw, but it's just like this, they just saw that maybe we should be able to really support these guys who are just coming up. Yeah. Oh, thank you, man. But also, like, again, it's like there's a song by Ayubogada, and this now for me is always like, it bothers me a lot, is that Ayubogada is sampled by Kanye West and some other rappers, and that music doesn't play in Kenya. It's like, I complain about it a lot, but I feel like there's a way in which people wanna, like, you need to come in this way for us to see you. And that's what Dan was mentioning. It's like, it's been the fight of my life. I'm just like, I will fight anybody that comes in my way for that. It's like, nah, I'm not gonna be put in a box for easy consumption.
Okay, nice. Before I ask my next question, sorry?
I just had a quick question, and it gets a bit from Peter and from Opil's question. So artists, I think, are encouraged to steal, and artists should steal. And I think I hear a lot of people say, oh, don't copy the West. And I think you guys have been reflecting on some of that here, saying, don't worry, as long as we do it and we're African, it's African, and I fully agree with that. And so people say, don't copy the West, and they say copying is easy. Stealing is difficult. So I want to encourage you to steal from the West so that you then own it. And mentioning Ayub, Jay-Z or whoever those guys are stealing and owning it. And so maybe my question is, what have you guys stolen? Are you ready to steal? Can we steal together so that we steal these things from the West and we own them?
I've stolen skills, I can tell you, mainly.
I steal all the time. My heart is Ghanaian. But I feel like just being like, we are a melting pot of so many ideas, and that's maybe one of the strongest points for arguments for Nairobi, is we are such a melting pot for different ideas, and you see so many artists who are maybe just starting out will always play in Nairobi, and we have such a warm response to them. And for me, observing that helps me be like, yeah, okay, there's some things here that these guys have that we can add to our thing.
I was going to say, in addition to the stealing, what I am absolutely focused on personally is occupying the space. So I am putting my name on every single list possible, and I am putting my name twice and in bold, so that you won't miss me. For example, I just founded a company a year and a half ago called Semabox, and we are the biggest podcast incubator in Africa. We have over 700 episodes, heading to 800. And I think we're the biggest producer in the world by volume. That's my next occupation. I'm going to occupy biggest producer in the world by volume, because if I don't sit there, the guy in LA will sit there, and then he'll get the money. So mimi nitakaa hapo, and I'll wait for the dividend.
So Semabox is the one in charge of all our audio visuals here today. So they do a really good job. I wanna extend the question to Iona. To the question that was just asked in stealing, in fashion, and if you look at the room around, you just gave the example of Johan there. He's dressed in full African T-shirt, but then at the same time, Andrew at the back is only half. Yeah, I'm also half. Yeah, would you consider that it's almost like stealing or merging with Western outfits, or is that not your definition of it?
I wouldn't necessarily consider it stealing. I think it is a consequence or like a product of the hybridization and the evolution and the borrowing from each other's contexts in a good way, I think. When it comes to, for example, what Zara's doing, where they're taking everything from us and putting it out there as it's their own, that is stealing. But I think when we are adapting our textiles and our forms of dress to the modern day context, then it's a great way to celebrate ourselves, but also be relevant.
I think importantly is let's start by owning our own, our own things, our own music, our own fabric, our own art, our own content. Then we can get into, who's wearing what and who's, what I mean. But like me and Iona have talked about this a lot. We're not very good at, I think Africans in general, but I think Kenyans especially. And I've lived here since I was 6, so I consider myself, Kenyan by soil, but we're not very good at owning our things before someone else puts value on it, right? Which you guys, better than anyone, but like, and I think maybe that's where, for example, my project came out of, is that as a photographer, naturally I'm a documentarian, and I felt, this is a story that hasn't been told, which actually to me sounds crazy. I'm 26 years old, so, and this book is the first of its kind in Rwanda. So to me, it sounds crazy that I'm the first to even put out or document this kind of content of what I'd consider the most important heritage of Rwanda. So it comes down to it, like, we're not good at documenting our own things. So I want to put an emphasis on that. Like, let's take care of our own, and then it'll serve us.
Yeah, Mucyo. It's very interesting that you've spoken about Kenya particularly, because we do have that culture, which is very sad. And I must say, creatives generally, I do feel, have a very strong influence on a person's identity. Growing up, the cartoons we watch, the music we listen to, those are the things that inform really your identity, who you are, your narrative, if I may say. What do you think is the issue in Kenya particularly? Are we saying that, obviously we called you here because we identify you guys as being strong in vernacular art or creativity. How are we able to push that on, not just across Kenya, but across the continent, and allow people to embrace more of this African vernacular?
Just a two-part question to that. Also, I remember as a kid, when you listen to your gangster music with baggy jeans, influences your character, you think you're gangster, So yeah, as addition to what Steve is saying, how do you think that is our art and fashion and music is influencing us even today?
I think it's one of those things that has a simple sounding solution, but it's actually a lot more difficult. It comes down to how do we spread the word and the influence on how important our own culture is. Is it making music and putting it out and doing concerts and traveling and doing shows abroad, etc.? Is it putting out a book and trying to sell as many copies as you can? How do you convince other people in your, surroundings that there's value in this culture that you see value in? It's a difficult thing. You'd think it'd just be there. It's not. It usually isn't. So it's one of those things, I guess, that my answer is it's a struggle. You know what I mean? You just keep doing it. And I think that as creatives, that's what we do, is like we keep, whether there's 10 subscribers or, 1 million subscribers, you keep going, because that's what you know how to do, and it's what we strive for.
Yeah, just as you answer the question, this is open to any creative out here who feels like they have a good answer to that. Yeah.
I think that also it comes as a great acknowledgement that we're constantly influenced by the creative world in every single way. There's always music playing, there's always people wearing clothes. So once we begin to acknowledge that, I think then we start to see the power and the role in what we consume has in how we can push forward our industries. Does that make sense?
I guess for me, the answer to the question, why don't we value our stuff, I think that's because of colonialism. It really hit us very, very hard. And you have to remember that in other contexts, colonialists came in and kind of went out. But in the Kenyan context, they came in and settled. And they stayed, right? Colonialism was that 50 or 60 years of violence, destruction, constant indoctrination. In our country today, people consider the Christian faith as the beginning definition of Africans. Africans don't exist. They're very rarely mentioned in the Bible. But we consider that to be because of how violently and how deeply it affected us. So we have to be kind to ourselves as to why, in my opinion at least, as to why we don't see this. Because it was actually beaten out of us. Quite literally, it was beaten out of us. And then the second thing that's related to that is we have to change how we name things, how we call things. Beethoven plays some music without drums and then we call it a masterpiece, right? There's no drums. Okay, fine. But then when we play music, our own, we call it ethnic or traditional. So that's not mainstream. So mainstream is Beethoven and then ethnic is Wandindi guy on the side. So it's important for us that we change how we name these things. So it's not Maasai traditional architecture because it's not Italian traditional architecture, right? It's Maasai architecture because we say Greek architecture. We don't qualify it with another adjective. And it's really important for us as artists and architects that are talking about this to take that. If you hang around me, I'll tell you, I never say traditional music. I don't say that. I say classic music. And I don't say Kenyan. I like to say classic Kikuyu, classic Embu, because I recognize that these were distinct types of music that are masterpieces by themselves. And so I think the first part is accepting that colonialism really hurt us. And not only the physical thing, the psyops. You know now, Cambridge Analytica has taught us about psyops, yeah? The psychological operation that they put on us was deep. We haven't recovered. In fact, we're just beginning to see how deep it was now. We're thinking, oh my God, that's what we're doing. We're recognizing now how deep this cut us. So forgive ourselves for this. Secondly, let's change how we name the stuff that is ours and how we talk about it. And then just to touch on what Blinky had mentioned earlier, because of how the structure of power was made in Kenya, in my opinion, we ended up having people that were conveying colonial power who retained it after independence. And this affects us in many ways because you have the guys who started the first insurance companies in Kenya were benefiting from money left by the colonial government for insurance companies. And then you can keep going in all the other sectors, and it's the same thing. And so there was a power that they discovered and kept about being the person who controls what an architectural firm will be, what an insurance firm will be, what music will be played on radio. And so we come down through the years, and the reason Blinky was struggling to be played on air, I was struggling too, but you waited too long to go to live. Me, I went live, I was like, whatever, man. But but the reason is that in the 90s when Kenya started, so warning, I like history only to use it. When Kenya went into let's have a liberal airwaves, so more radio stations, more TV stations, the people that were ready for it had come from this power structure, right? So because to be ready to set up radio, you need money. So the guys that already had come from this power structure. There's a famous quote about Kalamashaka. When Kalamashaka took the music, I won't mention the radio station because they've changed. But when the Kalamashaka, the biggest product in Kenyan music in over 30 years by that time, when they took their record to this station, the person who was the boss of the station said, Kenya has no music. Why did they say Kenya has no music? Of course Kenya has music, but in their opinion, Kenya had no music. And so they didn't play Kalamashaka, right? And we still suffer from that. The guy who selects the songs, that guy is still feeling power, still feeling like he can change and affect everyone else. Of course, the internet has helped us a lot. But the guy who is setting the playlist is still a very, very, I would say, I don't know, I need a word for him. Is a guy we need to work on. gently, so that we can, and the context of this is the Kenyan music industry and the Jamaican music industry come from the same place. But there are two events that happen in the same year that send us in different directions. 1965, there's a concert in London organized by a promoter from London who brings over a very exciting musician at the time called Bob Marley and the Wailers. And they go and play in London. And because they play in London, they open up business opportunities in a different way, right? They're connected to the music industry in different ways. And Bob Marley goes on to say, music from Trenchtown is also rock music, because rock music was the biggest music at the time. And so this is Trenchtown rock. Free history lesson for today. At the same time in 1965, a promoter working in Kenya from the same UK doesn't take the act from Kenya to the UK. He instead takes the record. So he leaves the maker of the record here, but he takes the record. The record is sampled in the UK, and they make samples. The song is Helulelule by Daudi Kabaka. A band in the UK re-records the song, and it makes £1 million in 1965. So Bob is in London making the £1 million, and then our guy is left here. But the music goes there, and it still makes the £1 million, right? And now you have a situation, 40, 50 years later, Jamaica is the biggest producer of music per capita in the world. They make more music per person than the whole world combined. And Kenya, we make a lot of music, but the group claiming to represent the biggest group of musicians only says 15,000 musicians. So these types of things are affecting how we work, because they're economic things, and they affect us today.
You've said it so well. I don't have a lot to add. But also, like, even growing up, I remember being, and maybe they meant well, but I now look back at it and be like, that was wrong. It's like, if you don't speak English, they give you this box or wooden thing, and then you're fined and beaten. I saw the president the other day being like, he was talking in Kiswahili, and it's like, imenichanganya kidogo. Let me switch to English. While I remember playing a show with Amadou and Mariam, and just watching them, they played their whole set in their language, and this was in Central Park. It was like probably like 5,000 people listening to them. None of us knew what they were saying, but we connected because the music was powerful. And so now that that made me change my perspective. It's like, oh, okay, maybe there's a way in which, when it makes sense for me, because I'm not them, but it's like, I will go full on in Swahili in some lyrics, because I've seen the example that it can work elsewhere. And I think in this place we are in, we pick and choose the things that work, and what's the most effective way to spread this idea, and in which language will it be most effective. And that's how I end.
So we'll have one more question from down here, Noel, and just as a comment before you ask, and the history lesson, Dan, you've just given us makes a lot of sense, because if you think about the population of Jamaica now, I was even shocked to find out it's almost like 3 million only. It's only 3 million people and have such an influence of culture around the world. What's the population of Nairobi? We don't even have that. It's the same 3 million, but the Jamaican 3 million is global. The Nairobi 3 million is not even going to Uganda, you know.
Okay, thank you guys. I'm inspired. So my question is, the thing I see that's common is y'all are self-made, right? And as an aspiring artist, I guess, or I would say, there's an element of freedom that I struggle with in expressing myself. I think, having gone through a certain education and feeling like I have to get through certain benchmarks to be anything. And then sitting before you guys and seeing these are self-made people, I would ask, how are we free enough as Kenyans? What do you think? Can you comment on that? And how can we be more free? I guess I have, yes, how to be more free, how to express. And
you want me to start again?
Maybe Iona can start then. I'm saying maybe the ladies first then.
Please, yeah, please.
I don't think we're free enough, and how to even begin to kind of combat that is quite tricky, but I think we need to almost just close our eyes and go for it and just be very unapologetic and occupy the spaces and tell our stories. For me, I kind of just, close my eyes, go for it, do it, and then think about it later. Because if I begin to think about it and begin to think about how to do it, I kind of get like paralyzed. So, I don't think for me, there's no other way.
Yeah, there's a Jay-Z lyric that I really love and said, I had to get off the boat so I could walk on water. And one of the things that for me I've always done is, or thought is, you become by doing. So from the first, like, I listen back to the Just a Band records, and I'm like, one of the things that I see overall in that work is not, I feel like I can make better music now, but I can see the fight in that, because we didn't have producers, we became our own producers. We didn't have engineers, we became our own engineers. We didn't have a place that was open enough to give us a chance to play in. We figured out how to get the music directly to people. So I don't really always think that we're self-made in that way. I think you get to a point because someone else opened the door for you. And so what you can do where you are is start where you're at with what you have till you get to the next level. And the next level, you get more credit to get to the next level. It's very hard, but as of right now, I'm just telling you what I've seen work is you can't stop making because someone else says you can't do it. You need to believe in it and you need to do it.
To carry on what Iona said, to be honest, I just don't care. That's my answer. I think I'm one of those individuals who, like, I have such full confidence and belief in my abilities and storytelling ability from my perspective that I don't believe anyone can tell that same narrative the way I can from my period. You know what I mean? So now granted, that's not everybody. So I love what Blinky said, is like you take it one step at a time. And I think a friend of mine once told me I was having nerves about something and kind of like feeling some imposter syndrome. And she said, you aren't until you are. So that there's like, if you consider yourself and then consider, I don't know, the person you consider to be above you in said field or whatever, there's a literal day, time, hour, like second where you aren't and then you are. There was a point at which I wasn't published and then I was. Like, I can't tell you, like, there's no magic. It's honestly, find the belief in yourself and like you'll do whatever you want. Like, yeah.
So, all right. So I'm gonna do two last questions. Last for real. Okay. Final. It's a final. So it's.
Hello, everyone. So my question is, we're talking about creating value, and most of the time, I feel like most artists in any field find the value of their work once they see the impact. But when you go across the value chain, if you go to Kibera, and most of the jewelry pieces made in all these flea markets and all that, you'll find them being made in these informal settlements. And most likely, they don't even understand the value of their work. It's more of the hustle. They're just pushing the hustle. And even textile industries, there are so many tailors everywhere you go. Everyone who has worn any African outfit today, most probably sometimes you don't even get it from like label stores. You go to your neighborhood tailor. So my question would be like, how do we communicate the value to even the people at the bottom of the value chain who are more focused on the hustle and not aware of what the value of their work translates to in the larger realm, per se, yes. And even to the people in low-income communities, we celebrate our artists outside more than inside. When you look at the people in Nairobi, maybe sometimes it's ignorance. Yes, we'll see value in outside because, as we said, colonialism and all those other factors, but how can we communicate the essence of African vernacular and all that to the people in the ground, so that it's not only us in these circles, in these talk shops that are just like, yes, the value is here, but then out there, nobody really gets it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my name is William. There's been a thing that's been itching since I walked in here, and nobody has mentioned it, and I'm glad that I think that we were itching together here. And it's touching on almost every question that I've had been asked, but I've not had that particular answer being given or that particular part being mentioned. She asked about freedom. I almost shouted. The freedom is there. You just either don't have the money to buy it. Nobody has mentioned money. And I wanted to ask, is it that one of the things that I've discovered the West does that we don't do, and I've heard about stealing stuff from the West from Arthur there, they always commercialize whatever it is that they're doing, whether it's art, whatever it is, it's always commercialized. Even I was thinking how we think about, how we've come to love even Italian food, how it's made, how it's sprinkled. And you're being sold this sprinkling thing. It's sold to you. You have to pay for it. That food is expensive because then it was the spice was sprinkled. It wasn't just thrown there how we throw, you just throw kata quickly and throw, but it was sprinkled. So I wanted to ask, and she's mentioned something about it. Where is money in all this? You have spoken so much about so many things, and I thought, if you want to have freedom to introduce anything, just have the money. So when you talk about it, is it that we're not innovative enough to, sell our stuff so that it makes us money, so that we get bolder every day? Even I can imagine if I had $1 million in the bank, how nice a design I will produce seated in some, So there's an element of economics, there's an element of money, and don't forget, everything in the first place is free. Even land is free. It's always there. Nobody has ever made extra land unless somewhere in Dubai. But everything is free. Even what we steal is as our lecturers used to say, it's an inspiration that you borrowed. Whatever you steal, you borrow an inspiration. It's an inspiration from nature. You see a mountain, or you build a hut. You see this. You go and a kid tells you habari, and you make it a song. Everything is already there, free for us. So where is the money aspect in all this? Where's money? Where is money? I can't feel money. And this is what will make everything smooth. Yeah.
Maybe I can start. I think people have thoughts here, bubbling. Money, I mentioned money. Jamaicans earn $1 million in 1965, transforms the music, right, industry 50 years later, until today. If I give you $1 million today, you'll be fine in life. If I gave you 1965, you would be, it's a transformative amount. I want to just talk about two things that you mentioned. I'm sorry I didn't catch your name. I'm really sorry about that. But you mentioned something important. You said the phrase is, we don't value our artists at home, we value them outside. And I want to disagree with you slightly. And the angle I want to bring is that the people that don't value Blinky were the people on radio. It wasn't the fans. When the fans heard his music, they valued it. And same to me. When I didn't get any traction on radio, I went and played live. And between 2008, I think, and 2012, I think I played 1,000 gigs in places that we used to play 100 gigs. We played a lot. There are some days we played 4 or 5 gigs the same day. And this is also something that the black American music, Nat King Cole, that's how Nat King Cole got on TV. He was touring so much that the TV station could not ignore the music, yeah? So I just want to clarify that it's because of the power structures we have, which is why the institutions, specifically government and corporate, don't value the art. But the people do, and they know what it is. One other small story is, if you notice, in Kenya's music industry now, suddenly vernacular music, as you call it, is very visible. If you think of TikTok, the biggest songs, the 3 biggest songs on TikTok in the last year and a half, have been songs that are in African language, Kenyan classic languages, not mainstream pop. That's something we knew about would happen in 2013. We've been talking about it because the platform didn't exist. For as long as you needed to take your music to Kiss 100, Kiss 100 said, you sing in Kikuyu. That's not us. We are Urban. Urban does not include Kikuyu. So go and jump in the lake. But then once the platforms are opened, then everyone likes it. Personally, my favorite musician is Samido. I love that guy. I love his music. I don't know what he's saying, but I love it. I just enjoy that stuff so much. And that's what's happening. The people get it. The institutional guys may not get it. The government of Kenya doesn't know Angeshimutu enough. They just don't care. And it's a tragedy that they don't. But those of us who are into art, we know her. And so it's our job, I guess, a tragic job to bridge that gap. Over there and teach the government about her. And I feel the same way about JSO. I feel the same way about Oriokolo. I feel the same way about myself. I mean, I think Blinky, you deserve an HSC, man. Yeah. I think we've done the work.
If you know someone in government, I can give you my contacts.
Yeah, and your ID names.
And my ID names.
Yeah, it should be Bill Salanga, HSC. Minimum. Yeah. It's
correct.
We've done the work. We just need to bridge that gap. And that's our challenge now, I feel, which was talking about earlier, is branding. We need to do some branding to get ourselves, our names in the rooms. Now, short comment about the commercial part of this. Art for commerce has always had many issues. One is that there are tendencies for it becoming exploitative. And this is standard in all even technology has this problem, that we are making good technology and we are considering the innovation to be American, but it's being made in sweatshops in China to people who come from low economic backgrounds. And this is a challenge we have that we must, one way I think we can try to attack it, build better companies. So for us creators, let's build better companies. Everyone who's a creator here, make a better company. And then secondly, buy from good companies so that we can start to shift our money to the good company. And I want to make a good note. For Boogertman as an architectural firm to put this together has blown my mind because I trained as an architect and I quit architecture because of my boss. But if I had the bosses I'm seeing here, I'll still be doing these things. It's a fantastic thing to make this space where people are able to come, be effective, have impact, and then earn money. I think I really wanna. You guys have done a fantastic job here.
Thank you, my brother. HSC. I'm just gonna fast. What was the theme of this?
The African Vernacular.
No money in that in that theme. Anyway, the arts are severely underfunded in Kenya, and that's the truth. So
Period.
it's very hard for me to even start engaging in that conversation because for me it's been everything I get goes back into the art. So if I'm competing with Burna Boy on a money front, there's no competition because Nigerians who are ogas are just like, that's our guy. Psh. Like, that's how they work, the music industry works. With us, it's like you have to, we made the first viral video in Kenya on a budget of 7,000 shillings at the time. I was like, so people are seeing Mac Mende, and everyone is calling me, like people from big companies. It's like, you need to make more. How? Like, put the toa pesa bro to a mortgage. Vile tuna come through ni original. Skuma wiki dry, bila roiko. Hapa tu mahewa ndio soy sauce. It's just like, give me the money, I do this thing. It's like, so when people look at you, the work and be like, oh, but you're not doing it like so and so, so and so and so and so. It's like, my friend, we've made this thing work with blood, sweat, and tears up until the point where it can become better. But sometimes I really sympathize with this situation because it's like, unless you're coming from a rich family and your family really understands the hustle that goes into making anything. For me, it's like, if I see a Kenyan artist doing something, I want to clap because it's like, I know you're not working with the wind. You're going almost always against the wind. So, to a pesa bro, to a mortgage Joe. And also, like, what's it called? A lot, like the genesis stories of a lot of bands, like Sauti Sol came up with Alliance Francaise. Just a band was seen by Goethe Institute. Like a lot of these guys who are now making waves over the last 10 years, and your come up is probably 10 years if you're doing something right now, was seen by someone who's probably not from here. So it's a challenge. So that money conversation is not easy. We need another session that's themed money and art. What's your bank account?
I think it's also important to remove the value just being around money, because it's around so much more. So I think in terms of how to get that out there is to have the conversations and to go outside your context and speak to the people. Because what we've had with a lot of farmers is wool is a huge money spinner, but a lot of the farmers caring for their sheep have no idea. So they don't care for their sheep with that in mind. So by the time someone's coming to tell them that actually this holds a lot of value, they're like, wow, okay, I've lost a huge amount of money in that. But then separating the money from the value is really important, in that without the perceived value of a product, no one is ever going to want to spend the money on it. And I think that's something that we've had a lot, especially there's been times I've been in the shop, people have come in being like, oh, why is it so expensive? It's a Kenyan product. It's made by humans. It's made by artisans. There's so much that goes into it. And unless we tell those stories, we can't really put that across, and people can't really perceive that value from it.
I'd like to add. Sorry, sir, what's your name? William. I think personally the best work I've ever made has been with budgetary constraints. So with like, no money. And anyone here will tell you, if you're making art for the money, you will not make any money.
Yeah.
For example, this book project, right? I didn't get a grant and then I decided, okay, I have the money now, let me make a whatever. Nah, I went to the right people, that borrowed my dad's truck, got a bunch of friends. I had a friend who was an electrician, so we jerry-rigged a generator so we could power my like a studio light, that we would take to the bundus and shoot there, and everyone who was involved in this project from day one was not gonna see any money. Do you know what I mean? So everyone who put their work into it wasn't gonna see any money. So I very much agree with Bill that the art industry is not funded like it should be. It's not. Forget even just money, even just attention from like you said, the gatekeepers. So if we can solve that problem, then the right work can get to the right people, and then hopefully we won't be struggling for budget to create something really, really great. So, yeah.
Great, and I think that marks the end of this session. Is it a burning one?
Sure. Hi. Thank you everyone for this very informative panel discussion. So I have a question very much related to history and still very much related to how we're perceiving art and our culture now. So growing up, right, I had a chance to go from 844 to I was still in 844, but there's a time they switched up. I think it was around when I was in class 6 or something, but I did arts and music in school. Like, it was there in the curriculum, right? There's a point where we learned about traditional instruments. There's a point where we learned about the different, classic instruments. And there's a point where there was a lot of interest in certain passions when we had 7 subjects in school, right? And so far we've been talking mostly about how the art and music space is currently and discussing the different options that they are there for each one of us who are interested in it or playing a part in it, and the solution-based conversations that have answers that have come out in general. But I would like to also ask it to either or all of you as to whether you think a change in the curriculum can actually implement a lot more in the future for a lot of the people and how we perceive art, because there's a way, people listen to Bill's music, they either have to find it or be put on in one way, or he's pushing it himself, right? Same way as anyone in radio. And the same way for Iona, like, the full process start to finish, but you're the only one appreciating the full process entirely, Same with Mucyo, like when he started his book, he didn't really see the value of it in the end as being monetary, but it was kind of blessed in a way that it was appreciated from an outside space, right? So I want to know if, out of the 4 of you, if you think in the future one of the best ways to actually change the ecosystem that we perceive, receive, or appreciate, or put value on any of the, the arts or music or fashion that we do receive as a general public in Kenya is very much bound to change if we actually implement certain educational or curriculum systems that can affect the future generation. And if you think either one of you are in a position to influence the future generation with some of the work that you've been touching on.
1000%. I think education plays a huge role in shifting this appreciation that we've been talking about for this whole panel. I think teaching more, so like whether it's like, creatives like us doing workshops or whatever, which I'm sure all of us have done. I think if you put more attention into like teaching the youth, the skills, the interest, in fact, forget even the skills, just the interest, even if it's just a history class, right? Just like teaching them that, because everything I learned was from YouTube University. Do you know what I mean? So it wasn't that I was taught it. It wasn't that I was, it came out of interest, and I had to find that interest myself. So I think education does play a huge role, 1000%, yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. For example, my mum, who was the founder of the business, she's completely switched and is doing a lot of educational initiatives in terms of teaching younger designers or people who are just wanting to come up in the trade, because we need that transfer of skills. But I think another thing that having more creative outlets within the educational system is important for is just changing the way that you think, and that can be applied in absolutely anything. Like, for example, someone who goes into finance, they still have to think creatively, but without the outlet to kind of, change your mind and change how that happens, then it's impossible to go through.
Agreed. The only thing I'd add is I think we need to change the pedagogy, how we teach. The only example I can give is computer science. In Kenya, we teach you this is a monitor, this is a printer, input devices, mouse, keyboard. But in the States, they tell you, here is a computer, this little car is connected to your computer. Please write code to get the car from move here to there. And that's a completely different approach to the same topic. And the students come out completely different.
Yeah, just small. I dropped music and physics in high school, and now those are the things I need the most because the teachers were just teaching their own things, and I just didn't ever see how it applied to my life. But now I'm just like, I wish that I got that, like it was taught, exactly what Dan is saying. It was taught in a way that it makes sense, like that I can apply it now. Because now I've been forced to learn it as a, yeah.
All right, thank you very much. I think let's give a big round of applause to